So in 1999, there was a song that came out that was a game changer. This song began playing, and it was all over the radio. In fact, it wasn't just on Christian radio, it was on secular radio as well. It became incredibly popular. And that's what's so amazing about music is it can, in moments, transcend genres and even ideologies when the music just hits just right. And the song I'm talking about is by MercyMe, and you've probably heard it. It's called I Can Only Imagine. And that's not the song we're talking about today. It's a great song. I love that song. It is so inspirational. We just sang it at my grandma's funeral a couple months ago. It's just such a good song. But I use that and I talk about that because I wanted to talk about the band MercyMe for just a moment. You see, I remember having a conversation with Dina when we were dating, and both of us thought that song was awesome, that song was just amazing, but we thought they might prove to be a one-hit wonder. We're not so sure if this band is going to make it. We think, maybe they just hit that one-hit wonder thing, a band that has one great song, but nothing really comes from the band afterwards. Well, we couldn't have been more wrong about MercyMe, as they've had a number of number one hits over the years in the Christian radio, and they put out a lot of great music over the last 2.5 decades. I love their music. They're really great to see in concert as well. They have a great combination of creativity as well as inspirational lyrics to their songs. And what's interesting to me about that song, about I Can Only Imagine, is that they made a movie about that song. It was such a powerful song that they ended up making a movie about it in 2018. And it was all about kind of what transpired that made him want to write that song. And I didn't know the story, the details of the life of Bart Millard, the lead singer of the band. His life is really, it's been full of struggle. It's been full of a lot of struggle. His parents divorced, and he was forced to live with his dad after his mom took off. And his dad was physically and emotionally abusive throughout his childhood and throughout his teen years. And the struggle with his dad left scars in him that they didn't heal quickly. These scars didn't. And I would suggest that if you haven't seen the movie, I Can Only Imagine, that you watch it sometime. It's really worth the watch. But as Hollywood goes, I'm certain there are at least a few moments in the movie that are over-embellishments or some points that might be pushed a little harder, but I'm pretty sure it keeps pretty close to the story of Bart. And so it's a really cool one. If you haven't seen that movie, I would strongly suggest it. But when you watch that movie, you're going to see the struggle behind the lead singer of one of the most successful Christian bands of our time. And I think it's important to understand everyone has struggle in their story. Everyone deals with things. Sometimes we look at our artists and leaders and we think they have it all together. Their life is completely put together, but sometimes we don't know the things that shaped them, the things that they're working through in any given moment. And you're going to see when we read the lyrics of the song we are talking about today, that Bart, who wrote this song, he's struggling even at the beginning of this song because he's having a hard time. He's on the stage and he's talking about how he wants to teach truth, but in this moment, it's just struggling. It's hard for him. Growing up, I was a fan of anything and everything Michael W. Smith. If you grew up in the 80s in the church, you probably heard a lot of Michael W. Smith. He was my favorite Christian artist. I had many of his tapes. Yes, I said tapes, not CDs. I had his tapes. I do have one CD of his, but mostly I had tapes. You see, most people don't realize that Michael W. Smith had dealt with addiction to drugs and alcohol. But he pressed forward and became a giant in the Christian music industry. God led him through his struggle, but it was a struggle that he had to go through. And he became something greater because of that, because he worked through it with God. Another singer-songwriter from my childhood in those days was Stephen Curtis Chapman, and I love his musicality and the thought he puts into his songs. In 2007, Stephen Curtis Chapman wrote a song called Cinderella. And he wrote that song to honor his daughter. And the gist of this song is that he was going to dance with Cinderella because sometime soon the clock is going to strike midnight and she's going to be gone. And he didn't want to miss those moments with his daughter as she grew up. And I have a hard time hearing that song at this stage of life I'm in, where my girls are 16, 14, and 12. Life moves so quickly. I understand why he wrote that song, but what you might not know is that a year after writing that song, his son was backing out of the driveway and accidentally struck his sister with an SUV. She was 5 years old and she died. The song was merely prophetic. He was going to dance with Cinderella because one day she was going to be gone. And I've seen some articles in recent years, and it was incredibly painful for the Chapman family, but God led them through their struggles. He was with them in the midst of their struggles, in the midst of their pain. And incredibly, though it was painful at first, Stephen has continued to perform the song Cinderella. He's found it to be healing and filled with hope as he performs it, because he wants people to understand the truth of that song. I don't know all the stories behind all the songs. I don't know all the stories behind all the bands, but I know that everyone deals with struggle. Everyone in this room deals with struggle. Everyone has something going on. Something, maybe it's not obvious. Maybe it's all too silent. Maybe it's all inward. But the struggle is part of our existence. In this sermon series, we're looking at songs, and we're using them to jump into points of Scripture. And I'm not going to recap the previous weeks, but I will say that they are on YouTube if you want to catch up with what we've done the past few Sundays. This week's song is called Even If by MercyMe. It's a song of hope in the midst of struggle. And as I was thinking about how I wanted to present this song this week, I realized that though it's not a perfect example, we have a situation in the book of Daniel that speaks on the same idea as this song. So we're going to be looking there today. So if you want to turn in your Bibles, we are going to be in Daniel chapter 3 this morning. And Daniel is one of the most interesting books of the Old Testament. Part of it, the first part of it, is all narrative of the life of the exiles in Babylon and later Persia. And then the end of the book of Daniel is very prophetic in nature. He's prophesying for us. And what we have to understand about the book of Daniel is that all of this happened because of Israel's consistent and many times straight up rebellious sinfulness. That's the whole reason we have this book of Daniel. God had called them through the prophets. God had called Israel for years to return to him. He had warned them over and over that I'm going to wipe you out. You are going to be exiled. I am going to allow a foreign nation to take you over. And the people heard the prophets and in many times tried to kill the prophets because they didn't like the message from God, and they pushed the prophets away because they didn't want to hear that they were living in sin. And the kings, they continued to worship the pagan gods and set up places for the people to worship these pagan gods. And the sin went from generation to generation to generation, regardless of God's warning. And so God rose up the Assyrian army to wipe out Israel, the northern kingdom. And then Judah, who was the southern kingdom after they had divided, they didn't listen to God either, so God rose up the Babylonians to take over, and for the most part, the Babylonians just kind of wiped out Israel, the rest of them. There was still a remnant, some faithful people who were spared, and they were taken into exile. And also, when the Babylonians came in, they took from the Israelites their youngest and their brightest and their strongest young men. And that's where we meet Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. 4 young men, probably teenagers when they were taken to Babylon. They were made to serve the Babylonian king. They were expected to be taught how to be Babylonian. Basically, the idea was they wanted to take everything Israel out of these men and make them Babylonian, just to kind of prove, look how powerful we are. Even your best, your brightest, they're ours now. And if we read in other prophecies that were taken, we can probably assume that these young men were made into eunuchs. This was to humiliate and defeat the Israelites, as their best and brightest would now serve Babylon. And they would be consumed by Babylonian culture and lifestyle. But if you read Daniel, you'll see that Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego trusted God, no matter what. And I want to pick up in chapter 3, and we're going to read specifically about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego today. So we're going to read Daniel chapter 3, verses 1 through 7 to start off this morning. King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue, 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to assemble the satraps, prefects, governors, and advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces to attend the dedication of the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces assembled for the dedication of the statue of the king that he had set up. Then he stood before the statue Nebuchadnezzar had set up. A herald loudly proclaimed, "People of every nation and language, you are commanded, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, drum, and every kind of music, you are to fall face down and worship the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. But whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into the furnace of blazing fire." Therefore, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and every kind of music, people of every nation and language fell down and worshiped the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Now, do you remember the first commandment? There shall be no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself idols. Israel knew they were not to do this. Daniel is an amazing book, and we see in Daniel the struggle was real for these young men. In this situation, it wasn't something they could control. They had been made to be put in they hadn't made bad decisions that had put themselves into this difficult situation. In fact, based off what we know from the first 2 chapters of Daniel, they had done everything they could to honor God, even eating his way when they were told not to. And now they're in this awful situation. You see, life didn't ask them permission. They were just made to suffer anyways. And now the king of Babylon was making them worship him through a statue made of himself. And one of the lessons we see in the book of Daniel, throughout the book of Daniel, is will you honor God no matter what? In multiple situations, these young men were tested, and each time they chose faith in God over anything else. And it's inspiring. And we tend to think to ourselves, well, I'm glad I'm not in that situation, right? Good thing I don't have to worry about that. But maybe we're in a similar situation. No, our government isn't forcing us to worship a statue when the music is played. But our culture is clawing at us to give up faithfulness in God and bow to the demands of cultures that is fixed on sinfulness. At every moment, the message is for us to give in to culture, to conform to the thinking of the day rather than to have the Bible as our background and God's word as a lamp unto our feet and a light unto our path, to trade the righteousness of our God for the approval of the sinful culture. It's a deal with the devil, and it's leading people away from God and towards death. So will you, in these moments, choose faithfulness or the approval of culture? We're in a similar situation. Let's see how Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego responded. Daniel 3, 8 through 23. This will be a long section, but it's worth it. 8 through 23. Some Chaldeans took this occasion to come forward and maliciously accuse the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. You, as king, have issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, drum, and every kind of music must fall down and worship the gold statue. Whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. There are some Jews you have appointed to manage the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men have ignored you, the king. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up. Then in a furious rage, Nebuchadnezzar gave orders to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar asked them, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is it true that you don't serve my gods or worship the gold statue I have set up? Now, if you're ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, drum, and every kind of music, fall down and worship the statue I made. But if you don't worship it, you will immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. And who is the God who can rescue you from my power? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to give you an answer to this question. If the God we serve exists, then he can rescue us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he can rescue us from the power of you, the king. But even if he does not rescue us, we want you as king to know that we will not serve your gods or worship the gold statue you set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with rage, and the expression on his face changed towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He gave orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than is customary, and he commanded some of the best soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the furnace of blazing fire. So these men in their trousers, robes, head coverings, and other clothes were tied up and thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. Since the king's command was so urgent and the furnace extremely hot, the raging flames killed those men who carried Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the furnace of blazing fire. The challenge was laid down. Worship the statue or be put to death. And I love the arrogance of King Nebuchadnezzar in this moment. He is challenged by these young men because they don't want to serve his gods or worship his statue. And Nebuchadnezzar thinks his power is real. He really thinks he is a god, or at least he is more powerful than God. And he says, and who is the God who can rescue you from my power? And I think to myself, wow, that's some arrogance. I don't know what King Nebuchadnezzar was smoking, but I think he was probably not helping himself out too much here. This is a direct challenge to God. Think of the scene, okay? How confident you must be to be in this position of power and say such a thing with such bravado. And then think about the fact that he was actually openly challenging God. He didn't even realize how tiny he was. And even way better than all that arrogance from Nebuchadnezzar is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's response. Let's read it again. Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to give you an answer to this question. If the God we serve exists, then he can rescue us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he can rescue us from the power of you, the king. But even if he does not rescue us, we want you as king to know that we will not serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up. You see, Nebuchadnezzar's confidence was in himself, in his power, in his position. Their confidence was in God. Notice they don't tell him God will rescue us. They do not say our God is going to rescue us. They say to him, he can rescue us. It's a big difference. Their faith isn't dependent on the outcome. They don't know if God will rescue them. They just know he can. They know and are convinced that God is all powerful and able to do immeasurably more than they can ask or imagine, but they do not demand it of him. They know their place. Too often we put stipulations on our relationship with God. As long as everything is going well, we will honor and worship God, but when life gets hard, we abandon God and then blame God for being the one who left the relationship. If God had fixed that problem, we would have continued to worship him, but God didn't do what I needed him to do. God failed me. And all too often, we want God to be a genie in a bottle and not the God of the heavens. I don't know why bad things happen. I don't know why God doesn't answer some prayers. I don't know why we can beg and plead with God and it doesn't feel like he hears us. But I'm resolved to worship him regardless of if things go my way or not. Now let's listen to that response one more time. Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to give you an answer to that question. If the God we serve exists, then he can rescue us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he can rescue us from the power of you, the king. But even if he doesn't rescue us, we want you to, as king, to know that we will not serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up. Even if. What's your fiery furnace? What is holding you to the flame right now? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's situation is likely not ours, even if we can draw some comparison. But there's a situation in each of our lives, or maybe multiple situations that are shaping us and challenging us, and sometimes maybe defeating us. I don't know why we face the struggles we do, but they are real and they are painful. Sometimes the struggle's our own fault. Sometimes, though, life doesn't ask us permission to wreak havoc. Do we have an even if mentality? That no matter what, even if it doesn't go the way I want, we will worship God. We will remain faithful. Are we resolute in our trust and faith that God is worthy of our praise and our submission, even if we don't understand why the road before us is so difficult? Even if life is painful, even if it doesn't make sense, even if our days are filled with sorrow. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, even if we die in the fire, we will not worship your statue. They knew that their worship was saved for the one who is to be praised for all time. They could have bowed down to that statue, couldn't they? They could have preserved their life that way. They could have conformed to their society so that they didn't stand out, so they didn't draw attention to themselves. They could have been saved from the agony of being tied up and carried away towards a fiery furnace, but their worship was reserved for their God. Now imagine in your minds the little bit of time that passes between the conversation with King Nebuchadnezzar and them being thrown into the furnace. Because there was a little bit of time. I mean, the king was urgent, but there was a little bit of time because they had to heat the furnace 7 times hotter, right? And then they were tied up. And then they were carried away by the soldiers. And in that time, what was their mindset? What was their thought process? Oh my goodness, I'm about to be thrown into fire. They didn't waver. They trusted God. And they still didn't know if he was going to save them or not. Even though they must have been in immense fear, they trusted that they had done the right thing and maybe God would deliver them. But he had not told them he would. There was never a moment where God sent an angel and said, fear not. We love it when the angel comes down and says, fear not. It didn't happen this time. There wasn't a moment where a voice from God says, don't worship that statue, I will save you. They just simply weren't going to dishonor their God. And they were going to worship him only. They looked in after they had been tossed in. The king looked in and his people looked in and they saw 4 people walking around in the fire. They weren't bound up. They weren't laying there. They were walking around. I wonder what they were talking about. The guards that threw them in died from the heat that was coming off the furnace, but the faithful men were walking around in the flames. They knew God could rescue them. They didn't know if he would. He did. I don't know what's holding you to the flame right now. Some of you, I know what's going on. Mostly, I don't know. But all of you have a God who can rescue you. He might not make life easy. You may have to deal with hardship, but your God will bring all things to good when he returns for his faithful people. And the question is, will you worship him even if life is hard? I want to read the lyrics to this song. This is what it says. They say sometimes you win some, sometimes you lose some. And right now I'm losing bad. I've stood on this stage night after night, reminding the broken it'll be all right, but right now I just can't. It's easy to sing when there's nothing to bring me down. But what will I say when I'm held to the flame like I am right now? I know you're able and I know you can save through the fire with your mighty hand, but even if you don't, my hope is you alone. They say it only takes a little faith to move a mountain. Well, good thing, a little faith is all I have right now. But God, when you choose to leave mountains unmovable, oh, give me the strength to be able to sing, "It is well with my soul." I know you're able, and I know you can save through the fire with your mighty hand, but even if you don't, my hope is you alone. I know the sorrow and I know the hurt would all go away if you just said the word, but even if you don't, my hope is you alone. You've been faithful, you've been good all my days. Jesus, I will cling to you come what may, because I know you're able and I know you can. I know you're able and I know you can save through the fire with your mighty hand, but even if you don't, my hope is you alone. And I know the sorrow and I know the hurt would all go away if you just said the word, but even if you don't, my hope is you alone. It is well with my soul. It is well. It is well with my soul. Will you please play the song?
They say sometimes you win some, sometimes you lose some. And right now I'm losing bad. I've stood on this stage night after night, reminding the broken it'll be alright. But right now, oh, right now I just can't. It's easy to sing when there's nothing to bring me down. But what will I say when I'm held to the flame like I am right now? I know you're able and I know you can save through the fire with your mighty hand. But even if you don't, my hope is you alone. They say it only takes a little faith to move a mountain. Well, good thing, a little faith is all I have right now. God, when you choose to leave mountains unmovable, oh, give me the strength to be able to sing. It is well with my soul. I know you're able and I know you can save through the fire with your mighty hand. But even if you don't, my hope Jesus, I will cling to you. Come what may, 'cause I know you're able. I know you care. I know you're able, and I know you can. Save through the fire with your mighty hand. But even if you don't, my hope is in you alone. I know the sorrow, I know the hurt would all go away if you just say the word. But even if you don't, my hope is in you alone. It is well with my soul. It is well, it is well with my soul.
Probably my favorite line from that song is, "But God, when you choose to leave mountains unmovable, oh, give me the strength to be able to sing, it is well with my soul." I don't know why sometimes God leaves a mountain unmovable. I would guess Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego wondered why they were standing in front of a foreign king whom they were made to serve and being threatened with death if they didn't worship something false. I don't know why we can pray in unity and God say, "That's not my will." But I do know that God is good. And I do know that his view is eternal and is greater than my limited human understanding. I do know that God has a plan, and sometimes that plan means that I have to trust even when I don't understand. And I know when I bring my struggles to God with thanksgiving in my heart, my prayers and petitions offered to God, that Philippians tells me that God will give me a peace that passes my understanding. In other words, God's peace will give me the ability to not understand, but trust God anyways. Even if whatever it is, whether it's struggle, whatever the heartache, whatever the battlefield, whatever the pressure, whatever the frustration, whatever the hurt, whatever the problem, whatever it is, no matter what, even if you don't like it or understand it, trust in the one who can save your soul for eternity. I know you're able, and I know you can save through the fire with your mighty hand, but even if you don't, my hope is you alone.